This is awesome, man. And I really appreciate this. And it's just kind of perfect timing and everything with the release of this book. And I tell you, for those that aren't aware, the book is called Nothing But a Good Time, The Uncensored History of the 80s Hard Rock Explosion. It's available now on Amazon. Go check it out. It's, I think somebody I know that I was telling about, they ordered it like and got it in 24 hours. So like they're already halfway through it. People are loving this. There's a lot of momentum here. Tom, just sort of tell us how this whole idea came about. We talked about you writing this with Richard, kind of doing this together. But how did this whole thing come about? Did you guys kind of get together on this? Did someone bring this to you? How did this happen?
We've known each other for a long. Richard and I have known each other for a long time. Like back to, we worked at Guitar World together in the mid 90s. I'm a little bit older than him, so he came in like as the young intern when I was the managing editor. And for like, we worked together at different magazines for quite a while, and somehow like the two of us, if we didn't have something specifically work related to discuss, we would end up talking about like this music, like we'd be like dissecting Tesla albums and like which is the better. So it was always like our common ground and this thing that we talked about. And for both of us, we realized it was like the music that really, as sort of him as a younger guy, but me as like in my early teens, just like completely went into my brain. And so we'd always toyed with the idea of doing this. And we might have even like spoken about it like specifically even like 10 years ago. And then sometime about like 4 years ago, we're like, we should really do this. And I don't know if it was like part of this zeitgeist of probably it's the same time people were deciding like, oh, maybe we should reboot Karate Kid and like all this 80s stuff that's coming out now probably all got started a couple like four or 5 years ago.
Sure. Yeah.
And we just sort of felt like it was time to do it. And I think we wanted to get it to do it before anyone else did. And so we were like, all right, let's do it. And we spent a year sort of putting together a proposal, and then another 2.5 years doing interviews. I mean, we did over 200 interviews for the book. So it was a massive undertaking.
Well, and that's kind of what sets it apart, because this is not a book where, you are going back and giving, doing kind of an autobiography on the era or anything like that. This is kind of an oral history presented by people that were there, or the bands themselves. So that right there sets it apart. You had to go back and do hundreds of interviews. I mean, that, like you said, that was kind of my question, is how long that took to do, because there are so many stories and interviews that you did to pull this off. And I think you even used some quotes from different podcasts over the years, and we've had all these guys, on our show as well. So just kind of talk about the interview side and how, what the word would be, tedious. Was it exciting and fun to kind of go back and catch up with a lot of these guys? There had to be some really good moments and some funny quips with a lot of these bands.
I mean, for me, it was great because these were like when I started in at Guitar World in the mid 90s, even though I had grown up on this music, the 90s was not a time when in a magazine you got to talk to these guys. Like that was the time where all of these bands were in the wilderness, like they had been replaced by grunge. So for me, the opportunity to talk to all the guys in Cinderella, to talk to, everybody in White Lion and stuff like that, I was like getting to live sort of my like 15-year-old dream, So it was amazing. And it was also actually amazing how cool everybody was. Once word got out sort of that we knew what we were talking about and that we were real fans and that we weren't going to ask the bands like the same 4 questions everybody else does. Like, hey, you had really crazy hair back then, or what, or like whatever, like seriously, like, like those, like whatever those 5 questions that they get are, they were really generous with their time. And then if we couldn't get somebody, if they weren't available or they didn't want to talk to us, then, that's the beauty of the world now. There is a lot of information out there. So, we could go to podcasts. We could go also to previous interviews that we had done in the past. For some people, we like did research of interviews they'd even done in the 80s, but mostly we got who we wanted, but to fill in the gaps. A lot of people, there are a lot of great podcasts out there. So we would pull from there when we had to, and get the information. So a lot of different sources like that. And there were people like we tried to get, not he doesn't really appear in the book, but like guys like John Bon Jovi, we knew we would never get because he doesn't really identify with this era anymore.
Sure.
And we knew, like, I think we sent one email to get Axl Rose, but we knew that we wouldn't get him either. But just because he doesn't do interviews. But basically, if we could get someone, we would. And like some people, it took a while. I think I have 18 months worth of emails trying to get the Sebastian Bach interview.
Oh man.
But we finally got him, So anywhere we could, we wanted to have the conversation ourselves, so that, especially because when you're doing an oral history, like you say, so if you have, say, we got everyone in Skid Row. So you've got the 5 guys in Skid Row, and you really want to ask them, you get 2 guys and they're talking about an event, and the book is at its best when you have all the guys responding about this one event, and you really feel like you're in a room with these dudes, like just conversing about it, and you're in the middle of a conversation between them. So when we could get fresh material, we did.
Well, one thing I find fascinating is that not only do you, focus on the Hollywood scene in the 80s, which of course, was it was dynamic, it was excessive, it was explosive. There was so many bands coming out of that. But you also, like you said, talked to guys from Skid Row, bands from the East Coast, Twisted Sister, and that has its own, and Cinderella, that has kind of its own sort of niche into that environment, because not every band came from Hollywood. And so how much of this did you kind of want to focus on the Hollywood scene? And then kind of what was the decision as far as, talking to other bands that were kind of outside that realm?
The Hollywood scene was something that we really wanted to get right, because that obviously, like, at that time, that was, even though there were bands coming out of other places, that was the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Because like the Strip, and people talk about this in the book, it's like Los Angeles is enormous, but the thing that we think of as the Strip, it's really a couple blocks.
Yeah.
So you had this concentration of bands and musicians interacting, playing shows, trading band members, Slash auditioning for Poison, Jakey Lee and Rat, these are all these weird things that happen that not everybody knows about. But these people, the genesis of Guns N' Roses is like, which is incredibly, I guess confusing is the only word, because all these guys knew each other, and Tracy Guns is in, and then Axl is in, and then Izzy's in, and then Steven Adler's out, and like it's very, so we wanted to get all of that right, because that scene was completely central, and I don't think the whole thing would have happened without it. And obviously the bands coming out of there were some of the most important ones. We also we wanted to focus on the East Coast, A, because we're East Coast guys, but B, Jersey was this really important other place. And when I say Jersey, that includes actually, Cinderella, even though they're technically from Philly, they would rehearse in Jersey, which is right across the river. That scene was also really important. It just wasn't as concentrated. It wasn't like this one place, so it's more difficult to cover, but we wanted to make sure that you had both coasts sort of ascending at the same time. And the problem with an oral history is you need all these people talking, so some people ended up getting sort of left out of the book, and we apologize to some of them because they're on neither coast.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did, I interviewed both Donnie and Chip from Enough's Enough, and there's like one Donnie quote in there or two, but we couldn't, there was no way to like hook Enough's Enough into one of these narratives.
They're a Chicago band. Yeah.
So it was we wanted to definitely tell both stories. I think the Jersey thing is really important with bands like Skid Row and even like just East Coast kicks and stuff like that. But if you were a kid growing up at that time and watching MTV, LA was it was like the Never Land, the Disneyland. And everyone even who was there really describes it like that. They're like, the strip was Mardi Gras. It was wild, and that was the fantasy was what was going on in LA.
What does it say about that music and that scene in particular that here we are 30 and 40 years later, and before COVID, you can still go see LA Guns in a club in America. You can still go see Firehouse and Great White and Warrant. And there's so many of these bands that still have touring entities based on the success they had back then. What does it say about that time and that music that resonates with people all these years later? Whereas there's so many other time periods that are all but forgotten, from disco and things like that.
I think it really boils down to it being like the new classic rock now. Like, it really has become, for our generation, my generation, whenever people are around 50, it's the music of their youth. Like, they're for the baby boomers, it was the Woodstock stuff, and for us, this was the music that when we were growing up was on MTV 24/7, that like was part of the fabric of our lives. And I think because it was like a celebratory kind of music, and was something that made us feel good when life gets complicated, you want to reach back to those songs. And I think so the audience is really there. We always say we're lucky we did this book now, because these bands are all in a great headspace, because they are making a living. They're not out touring 365 days a year in a bus, but they're doing fly dates every weekend, of course, before COVID,
Certainly.
and hopefully again.
Right.
They're doing these fly dates. They've got these passionate audiences. A lot of them, as they say in the book, are taking home more money now, actually, than they were back in the day, because they don't have like 12 semis and pyro and
record labels and everything.
Yeah. So it's a really good time for these bands. And a lot of them also say that, when they go to the shows, the audience is the parents, which is us, like people like me, who bring their kids who are equally into the music, some of them even their grandkids. I think it's transcendent. I think when you watch these videos on MTV and you see even like the numbers of views on some of them, it'll be like, like 40 million views. I think all kinds of people from different demographics are discovering this stuff. Yeah. And when you watch those videos now, there's so much escapism, and like the band seem like superheroes, and there's like pyro and the ego ramps and people running up and down these things, and like on, flying through the air literally, and drum sets flipping around. Like, it's like, what's not to like? I think it's just really captures the imagination. Again, if we had tried to do this book in 1996, it would have been a whole different story, because none of these bands were out working. But now it's okay to like this stuff again. And I think it has really been embraced by the generation that grew up on it as like their music, and therefore their classic rock, like I said.
We'll talk about some of the bands maybe that didn't make it on such a large scale, because like I always see the 80s and that time period as kind of being like the Wild West, and there was bands just getting signed to labels all over the place. And the formula was you had a single, you had that was a rocker, and then you had a ballad, and that would kind of go to the top. Talk about maybe some people from the book, and he's a good friend of ours. I'm not going to say Tough didn't make it, but Stevie Rochelle and like a band like Tough that didn't achieve, that it wasn't out selling out arenas. Talk about maybe some of the differences in some of the bands you talked to, like, like a Motley Crue versus a Tough, and how thin that line was between getting signed and going to the big time and just sort of toiling around in relative obscurity.
I mean, it was a time where a lot of people said to us, like managers and things like that, that like really all of the ducks for the super explosion to happen, all the ducks had to be in a row. You had to have the great song, you had to have the great look, you had to get the right tour, so all of these things happen. And some great bands, like, Faster Pussycat had one hit, they didn't become mega famous. Kicks, the same thing, they had one platinum record. Those are great bands that didn't get like the major
Sure.
explosion. But bands like Tough, and also like I'm good friends with Steve Brown from Trickster.
Oh yeah.
Some of those bands just got signed a little late, you
Yeah.
know,
Wild
and
Side is another one there too.
yeah, and South Gang with
Yeah.
you know Butch Walker. These guys got signed, you know, in like 1990, and there's you can't the music had a really good run by then, you know, and so by then it sort of was a little bit of a form, like you said, a formula, you know, the band sort of kind of looked like were imitating bands that had already been from this movement and stuff. So I think a lot of it was timing with bands like the later ones. They got to make one record and then they got cut off, you know, at the knees. You know, some other bands that didn't, like, I love this band Killer Dwarves from Canada who were out there, like they're amazing,
Yeah.
you know, and like they didn't get their break. I think it really, a lot of it boiled down to like scrappiness and business savvy. Even there's a story in our book where when Poison puts out their first record, look what the Cat Dragged In, and they do the first video for Cry Tough and it doesn't take off, you know, and they're like, uh-oh, what's going to happen now? And they just knew, because they were so smart, that, and the label was like, maybe we're okay, we'll move on to the next record. And these guys were like, we're not going to be defeated. And they were like, we got to make something happen. We have to get the Rat tour that's coming up, and then they're going to let us make another video. And like the guys in Poison, like that's how they thought. They're like, we gotta like flip the switch on this. And like there's 4 guys in that band who could be band managers, you know, and they figure it out and they get the Rat tour. And because they get the Rat tour, they get to make Talk Dirty to Me, the video. And there it is. And like not every band got like that lucky break like that, but not also every band has like the gumption and just like the single-mindedness and the business savvy to like pull something out of their butts like that when the ship's going down. You know, if you didn't get the big arena tour and you didn't get if your video didn't move from Headbangers Ball to Dial MTV, you know, it was a tough world out there, you know.
Well, you got a foreword in this book by none other than Slipknot's Corey Taylor, who I guess I didn't realize was such a fan of this genre. So it was really cool. It kind of described how you got in touch with him and sort of his fervor for this type of music. And I mean, I've seen him since you know the book came out and stuff. I've seen videos of him up there jamming with like Mike Anthony from Van Halen and doing a bunch of cool stuff like that. But this is kind of surprised me that he was such a fan.
I mean, that's sort of, I mean, that's, I think why this thing is having such impact. I don't know if like we actually got we were very fortunate and we made it. We were surprised and elated, but we made it onto the New York Times bestseller list last week. And that was, and the reason that is, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because these fans are everywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They
and like
are.
Corey was a kid growing up at this time. And if you were growing up at this time, and you were into loud guitar music, you were going to be into this stuff. And I know a lot of people subsequently maybe moved on to other interests or whatever, but I really believe, like for Corey, for me, for Rich, maybe for you, like that music that is your music when you're like 12, 13, 14, 15, it's going into like a not fully developed brain yet. Like, you know what I mean? Like you've got cortexes evolving and stuff, and it just gets in there and it captures you in a way that the music later in your life isn't going to. So yeah, we were so psyched when we asked Corey, because we'd heard that he was into this stuff. Like it wasn't like, and grateful too to him, but like it wasn't like a slog getting him. It was just like, hey, would you like to do this? He's like, totally, you know. And he just, that enthusiasm that you can feel in him is like what got us through making this book, you know, for 4 years of like, oh my God, are we going to finish this thing? And you were like, yeah, we're totally going to finish this thing because we love these bands and like we'll get through. Like we were running on that same energy.
Well, for those that maybe haven't checked the book out yet, I know you come, you know, kind of from the journalism side and also as a producer as well. But is there a band? Is there an interview? Is there a story that maybe kind of, I mean, you're very knowledgeable, about the era, but was there a story or a specific interview that kind of blew you away that maybe you could share with those that haven't read the book yet, that is something that really stands out that you're like, wow, I can't wait to get this in the book. This is going to blow people's minds.
I mean, sort of from the more less politically correct, but funny and kind of sort of the dirt side of things, when we started discovering the whole story about Dokken having video cameras, and like their whole back of their bus was wired for video, their lounge. And like you hear one guy say this and you're like, we can't run this unless we confirm this, Suddenly like every dude in Dokken is like, oh yeah, we totally had that, And so they would film.
That's a good one.
The back lounge is where everything sort of naughty happens, and so they were like videoing, taping it, and then like I asked JJ French from Twisted Sister, like, did you know about this because they were opening for you? He's like, oh yeah, like it was like this whole, other bands are like, hey, can we use your back lounge for the video? So like there were lots of weird funny things like that where like you're getting that interview and you're like, oh my god, I hope that we can actually corroborate this, because this is completely bananas, and what that's sort of, I think, how people picture the whole era to have been, but probably it was more isolated incidents like that. For me, like the interview that blew my mind, because I had been such a huge fan of his, was Vito Bratta, the guitar player from White Light, because he does no interviews.
Never. He's underrated too. Yeah.
He's so great. I love his playing. He's done like 2 interviews in the last 20 years. And I just, one day, like I kind of knew Eddie Trunk from somewhere, from Syria. And I know he's friends with Vito. I'm like, could you possibly just send an email to Vito Bratta and see if he would do an interview for a book? And like, I was not expecting an answer, but it must have arrived in the inbox, like at the right time of day on the right. And Vito's like, yeah. And I ended up interviewing him for like 3 hours. And again, like 15-year-old, like that's where you want to reach back in time to like 15-year-old Tom Beajour and be like, dude, look what you're doing right now.
Awesome.
You win. And he was just so good and so clear about like the whole arc and the career, and also about like how things ended up in the 90s. And it was just a pleasure to talk to him. And I hadn't expected to get that. So that was like, for me, my wow moment of like, I can't believe it's actually happening.
Well, you talked about how the kind of nostalgia resurgence, and, people, from around my age, which I'm 37 and up and
oh, you're a child. You're still a child.
I am. I was raised right, though, obviously, Tom.
Yes.
But that nostalgia hits so hard, whether it be, mini Nintendos, whether it be shows like Cobra Kai. People like my age now, are consumers and have a little more money than we did when we were young. To our parents were buying that stuff for us. So because of that, you've seen finally The Dirt gets made into a movie and comes out. Like, what do you foresee, or have you talked to anyone about this becoming any sort of a video presentation of some kind? Because like I just, there's been a lot of documentaries over the years, but to me, this could kind of be the ultimate all-encompassing deal. Have you thought about that? Has anyone contacted you?
We have been optioned for a documentary. So I've been told from my friends who work in the movie and stuff business that, like, that doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen.
Sure.
But we have done a deal to option it for a documentary with a director. Hopefully, I can't say it because then somebody will come over and beat me up. They'll come through that door right now. But it's looking good, and it like with a good company and somebody who is a fan of this music. So I think hopefully that should be happening. I mean, near future, I don't know, but like hopefully that work would begin on that, in the next year or so. So I'm really pleased about that, because we put so much into this book, and I think we really maybe have with it. Like you're saying, I think we've created a good framework.
Yes.
For how a documentary on this music could work in a couple of episodes. So in theory, that's getting done.
Well, Tom, before we let you go, and we want everybody to check out the book, go to Amazon, and that's a great place to get it because it ships really quick. The company was St. Martin's Press, I believe, is the publisher, so you can get it through them as well. But
you can get through them.
Yes.
You can get it at your local bookstore if you want to support your local indie bookstore. But yeah, it is. I think it's really actually they're discounting it at Amazon right now too.
They are, in fact, yeah. The hardcover I think is only $17.99, so check it out. It's Nothing But a Good Time: The Uncensored History of the '80s Hard Rock Explosion, which coincidentally is why I'm doing this podcast, because that scene was that impactful to me. So Tom, before we let you go, 4 quick questions. It's our final 4 drum roll, and you just give us whatever comes to mind, my friend.
Okay.
What was your first concert?
Billy Idol Rebel Yell Tour.
That is awesome. That's a great answer. I just saw him with Bryan Adams a couple summers ago, and I mean, mid 60s and still just amazing. I love Billy Idol. Who opened that on that Rebel Yell tour? Do you remember?
It was, do you remember Des Deckerson, who was the guitar player in Prince, who used to wear like the Japanese kamikaze bandana.
Oh, that's awesome. Of all, I know you talked about Vito Bratta, but is there aside from that, is there an interview that really stands out as far as like maybe, I know that you kind of from a fan standpoint that the Vito one was big for you, but is there one that of all you did 200 interviews that is just like, I can't believe I'm doing this. It's just like total starstruck kind of moment for you?
I think because I'm actually a huge Poison fan. Like I just love those first 2 Poison records. Talking to Ricky Rocket, I was nervous because I had a bunch of questions to ask him and we really needed to get them done. And I spent, when I was a kid, the Talk Dirty to Me video is, I think, what really like, that was like, in Star Wars where they shoot the missiles into the Death Star exhaust thing and it blows the whole thing up. That video was the one for me.
That's awesome.
So that was where I was like, that one I was really nervous about. And I've done hundreds of interviews in my life. And I was like, don't F up the Ricky Rocket interview. You need a lot of stuff from him. Okay.
So better shock rock band from the 80s, Wasp or Lizzie Borden?
Oh, I'm going to go with Wasp. I'm going to go with Wasp. Raw Meat wins.
Love Wasp. Man, I saw them in 2004 here, back before they were like banished from America.
Right.
And it was one of the best shows I've ever seen. It's still to this day. So I guess since we've already done your first concert, what is the last concert you went to and how long ago was it? Can you even remember?
Oh my God. It might've been, I don't think it might've been a Cheap Trick show.
And this is like a year ago, probably, or more than a year ago.
I have not been, I think I went to see like a couple local bands. I play in a comedy black metal band called Witch Taint. So we played a show, and then it might have been Cheap Trick. I can't remember. I've seen Cheap Trick like 55 times.
Yeah.
But it was something like that. But I can't remember what the last one. Oh no, you know what I saw was there's this fantastic, like they actually play all over America, all female Led Zeppelin cover band called Les Zeppelin.
I've heard it. Oh, good
they're
stuff.
Amazing. They're amazing. And that was like late January, early February, and then things got weird.
Yeah,
that was it. Yeah.
Mine was Aerosmith in February on their Vegas residency, and then a couple weeks later, I was on my way to see Kiss in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah, and while I was on my way there is sort of where the world ended.
Yeah.
While I was on the way, it was like, this concert's canceled. All the college basketball tournaments are canceled. Everybody go home and we'll see you never. And that's kind of,
yeah, I know, it's like everything's canceled. But so yeah, I think it was Led Zeppelin, and then probably some other like gigs at clubs and stuff. But yeah,
well,
it was weird. I mean, it's cool. All these bands now, they've got dates on the books. Like Vixen has dates on the books. I know Cheap Trick that I was mentioning, like it seems like these guys are going to give it a run this summer, at least. I know outdoor shows.
And I'm pissed about Vixen because I'm going to be in Vegas this weekend. They had a date on the books this weekend in Vegas that just disappeared. And I should have known, viewer beware these days, because,
Right.
a concert on a website doesn't mean it's going to take place. So I'm going to Vegas this weekend without Vixen, but I'm sure we'll catch him down the road. Tom, congratulations on what is
Thank you.
a project that hits home with so many people from so many different backgrounds and that just absolutely adore this era and this music and bringing it to life in the way that you did. I think that's really special. And, here's to better times in the future, and here's to more success and hopefully more projects down the road stemming from what you've done here. It's really great stuff, and we can't thank you enough, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Take care.